Hello, everybody. I'm going to give everyone just a second to get logged in to today's webinar, and then we will get started. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get things kicked off. Firstly, welcome to the October RDLA webinar. Thank you all for joining us. I know that this is a very busy month for all of us, so we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. If you prefer to call into today's webinar, you can do so using the phone number and webinar ID listed on the screen. As we are going through each of the presentations, we encourage you to ask questions for the speakers. We ask that you submit your questions into the Q&A box, and then a member of our team will direct them to the speakers for you all. And just a quick reminder for any media joining us, we ask that you formally announce your participation and refrain from quoting any of the discussion during today's webinar. Instead, we encourage you to reach out to each of the participants afterwards for direct quotes. We also have closed captioning available for you all. If you're interested in using that, you can just click the live transcript button at the bottom of your window and the transcription will begin. We also have Spanish translation services available. So Priscilla just put that link in the chat for you all. So all you need to do is click the link and a live English-Spanish translation of the meeting will pop up for you. All right, so this is our agenda for the day. We are going to get started with Carl Schmidt from the HIV and Hepatitis Policy Institute. We will then turn things over to Ryan Shea with Faegre Drinker. And then lastly, Jamie Sullivan with the Every Lab Foundation. So Carl, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And it's good to be here today and talking about our victory that we've all been, dreaming of, to get rid of copay accumulators and to make sure that copay assistance counts for patients, which is so important as we all try to afford our medications. So my organization, next slide, please, filed a Administrative Procedures Act complaint against the Department of Health and Human Services. And, there's all different ways we've been fighting copay accumulators and, through the media, through state action, through congressional action, through the rulemaking process at HHS. And we had this terrible rule out there that the Trump administration put out and said for the 2021 Notice of Benefit and Payment Parameters rule that insurers could decide themselves if copay assistance could count or not. And they could, therefore, implement copay accumulators. Well, since then, we've been trying to get the Trump administration and then the Biden administration to undo that, and we've been unsuccessful. So what my organization did, and we teamed up with 2 diabetes groups, is to file Administrative Procedures Act complaint. And that was in district court in the District of Columbia. And next slide, please. So Administrative Procedures Act complaint is you either have to prove that it violated the law, the regulation, or that it was done in an arbitrary and capricious manner. So we went about it 2 ways. First, we said it was a violation of the Affordable Care Act law, that insurers, because they're implementing copay accumulators, the insurers are collecting more cost sharing than they are entitled to under the caps. And also the definition of cost sharing under the Affordable Care Act says any other expenditure required of an insured individual. And it doesn't indicate where that money comes from. And then the implementing regulations for the Affordable Care Act, we feel make it even clearer that copay assistance should count, because it says cost sharing is any expenditure required by or on behalf of an enrollee. So then next slide, on the arbitrary and capricious vehicle, we took a couple tacks there. One, because it said that it allowed insurers to decide the rule if copay assistance can count or not. And they decide, the insurers, what constitutes cost sharing. And, with a rule, you usually say a rule is a rule, and this is what it is, and not allow the insurers to decide. Also, the 2021 rule abandoned a very reasonably good 2020 rule, which was never in effect, and they did it without explanation. And when you do, pull a rule, you have to go through the process and present options. And they also use this ridiculous excuse of an IRS guidance on discounts cards, which was way before the ACA was in effect. Discount cards had nothing to do with copay assistance, and guidance doesn't trump the law anyhow. So that was another, complaint. And then finally, we said that the 2021 rule assumed the regulators, HHS said, oh, it's not going to increase copay accumulators. And we know that certainly was not true. So next slide. So this, as I said, is the Administrative Procedures Act. They're supposed to go pretty quickly. And it's not like something that goes to the Supreme Court and things like that. They get done pretty quickly. Our requested relief was to set aside the 2021 rule that allowed copay accumulators, and therefore, when that's gone, the 2020 rule would be in effect, and declare that copay accumulators are illegal. Next slide. So the first thing we had to do was, set up, before I get to that, the government moved pretty quickly to dismiss the case within a couple months, saying that our groups had no standing. We didn't represent people who were impacted by copay accumulators. We knew that was a possibility, so we were working on adding 3 patients, which were directly impacted by accumulators. And we filed an amended complaint in November. And then we had to agree to a briefing schedule. And of course, the government, and you're going to see this a theme throughout, the government wanted to delay. They proposed like the last brief would be due in June of 2023. And these cases are supposed to go quickly. We got them down to the last brief would be filed in April of 2023. And then we filed our motion for summary judgment, which really just went into detail about all the items that I just talked about on why we feel it was against the law and arbitrary and capricious. And that was in February of 2023. Next slide. And we were very pleased that a couple days after we filed our brief, there was an amicus brief organized by AIMED Alliance. And it was, and I noticed that they're not on this list here. And I'm glad that you can see Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases on here. A lot of other groups signed on too. And, to show the breadth of the impact and the harm that copay accumulators cause. And next slide. And I think this was really important to show the judge that this really does impact patients and it does harm us. And there's a lot of people watching this and affected by it. Next slide. So we also had an amicus brief filed by Trial Card, and they are a company that actually provides does the copay assistance, the mechanisms, and works with several manufacturers. And I thought it was really important for them to describe to the court how copay accumulators actually work, because that was a big question by the government and what the insurers are saying. And they clearly said that the insurer pockets the full cost of the out-of-pocket maximum plus the amounts received through their manufacturer's assistance, resulting in a windfall to the insurers while harming patients. And they actually had data that showed that when their clients were in copay accumulators, that they did not pick up their drug. So we thought that was important. Next slide. And then pharma also submitted a brief too. And I think, again, this was important to show how copay accumulators work, because the insurers keep on saying, oh, the money goes back to the manufacturers, they collect it. Well, pharma was very clear. And, I think since it's their money, I think they know how the money goes. And, they said this allows for the collection of the manufacturer cost sharing as well as the full amount of the patient's deductible. It's the whole double billing. And there's a whole thing, arguments, oh, copay accumulators are shouldn't be cost sharing. They really just reduce the amount of the cost of the drug. And pharma said, no, these programs do not reduce the total amount the patient owes to the pharmacy. They operate as an additional funding source to pay for patients. Next slide. So then it was up to the government to file their brief, and they asked for a 2-week extension there. And we are very pleased that they no longer were seeking dismissal of the case. And they noted that we added those 3 plaintiffs. So we got over that hurdle. But I have to say, I was I was, one, disappointed that the government even defended this case. 2, that they kept on delaying. And 3, all their arguments were straight from AHIP and PCMA and the insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield. If you look at their briefs, all their footnotes were their documents. And so they clearly sided with them on every single argument. And here's some of the things that they said in their brief. It's not accurate to say that the insurance companies collect the value of the manufacturer coupons. All it does is delay encourage coverage liability by the insurers. Same exact language that you hear from the insurers. Next slide. They also, said that our claims was non-judiciable because the rule is not final agency action. It just declines to set definitive requirements in this area and provides flexibility to the states. They also said, and this was a point that they could have won on maybe, that, the statute is ambiguous. It doesn't say where if manufacturer assistance comes from or not. And just because we made that decision, it's not arbitrary and capricious. And then they said, if the court does find that we were arbitrary and capricious, remand the case back for further rulemaking. Don't make a decision on the definition of cost sharing. So next slide. So the only amicus brief that the government had was from AHIP. And, unlike they're trying to prove their point, the patient groups were showing the harm. Well, what AHIP did is mostly spend time talking about drug pricing. And I'm just going to read you a couple of points from their titles, from their table of contents. Copay coupons exacerbate the root causes of unaffordable drugs, high list prices, and market manipulation. That's page 4. Drug manufacturers keep prices artificially inflated by discouraging market competition. Page 7. Copay coupons are profit maximizers for drug manufacturers that ultimately hurt, not help patients. Page 8. So you can see they used their, they really didn't get into the legal arguments. All they did is talk about high drug prices and how terrible copay assistance was. Well, this case had nothing to do with the price of drugs, nor copay assistance. It had to do with copay accumulators and what they're doing and harming patients and double counting. So here are some of their arguments. Copay accumulator programs have been developed to mitigate the market distortion that coupons cause. The patient's out-of-pocket spending is still reduced or eliminated whenever a coupon is available. It does not provide a windfall to health insurance providers because the manufacturer pays the value of the copay coupon to the pharmacy, not the health insurance provider. Next slide. It also, made the point that copay coupons are discounts that the drug companies offer. And and this is not a windfall to the health insurance providers. Next slide. So our brief we filed, we did ask for an 18-day extension. This was the one delay that we had. Our lawyer was out of town and needed some more time. And in our response, we said, okay, insurers may not technically collect the coupons, But because the pharmacy actually collects the coupons, but the government acknowledges that such programs seek to shift drug costs from insurers to patients and manufacturers. That was straight from the government's brief, and the net economic result is precisely the same. And also we said there's no merit in the argument that despite the copay rule, the agency's action is actually a decision not to set definitive standards in this area. Next slide. So the government was the one who had their final response, and made me mad again that they asked for 3 extensions. One of them was for 1 month. And even after, that was the second one, even after 1 month, they asked for another extension. And, to be honest, there was one of the lawyers at the Justice Department, one of her parents was sick and died. So, we had to give, some sympathy and support, but this is the whole US government, the Department of Justice. It doesn't rely on just one lawyer. So, it was 53 days late. They said that the reasons, these are their arguments. The rule was issued because of the confusion with these IRS guidelines. Barring copay accumulators will lead to higher drug prices. That was not anything we argued or part of the case. Copay assistance provides patients with a reduction in their costs offered by the drug manufacturers, and therefore patient is not responsible for it, and it's not cost sharing. And the government did not issue any legal requirements, but they let the states decide. So that was their main arguments in their final brief. So that was in July, and we were waiting and waiting, and we said, are we going to go to oral arguments? Are we going to get a decision? We had no idea. We were still waiting for oral arguments, but then in very late September, we got word that we won, and the judge struck down the rule. And he said it was arbitrary and capricious, and that next slide. And he really said that, he vacated the 2021 Notice of Benefit Payment Parameters Rule. He said that we set this aside based on both its contradictory reading of the same statutory and regulatory language, and the fact that the agencies have yet to offer a definitive interpretation of this language that would support the authorization of copay accumulators. And this was the big thing that we won on. The agencies can't allow for the same meaning of a law and regulation to be chosen at the discretion of the regulated parties. He said it was arbitrary and capricious and struck down the rule. Next slide. On the other issues, I have to say it was not a complete victory. I'm looking at our arguments that this violated the Affordable Care Act. He said it's not clear as if manufacturer assistance must count as cost sharing. Therefore, he would vacate the rule and remand it back to permit the agencies to interpret the statutory definition. So he's giving the agencies an opportunity in the future. But he said this rule is not fixable. I'm just going to completely, stop it. And then also in the terms of the ACA regulation, that cost sharing is any expenditure required by on our behalf of the enrollee, that he agreed with on all our arguments that we presented, every one of them, and every one of the government's arguments he rejected. And so he was really seemed to think, but he didn't go there completely. He says, I thought of another argument that no one else you didn't put in your briefs. He said, the language says required by, and that means that the word by means the enrollee is doing the requiring. And he said, I find that odd. So I'm going to ask the agencies to grapple with this. And he just left it at that. That was like one of the final lines of the whole document. So next slide. So the judge's opinion, he did not address that insurers collecting more money than were permitted under the ACA limits and double billing. He didn't talk about that. He didn't address the IRS guidance issue with high deductible health savings accounts. And there were some other, claims that we had as being arbitrary and capricious. He said, I already ruled that it was arbitrary and capricious. I don't need to go any further. He did not come out and declare copay accumulators illegal, and he didn't address copay maximizers. But if there's a maximizer program that uses EHE drugs, I think this would, comply. Would apply, and they would not be legal. But it's when they take the drugs off of essential health benefits, that's when this court ruling would not impact it. Next slide. So these are the things I think it's important for advocates as we continue to fight against copay accumulators in how they work, and all the lies that we've been hearing, for years and years. But he even used our patient examples in the cost, but he clearly said this does increase patient costs. It does increase manufacturer costs. It does increase payments to insurers, and it is not a discount from the cost of the drug. So those are arguments that I think we should continue to use. And he didn't accept the government argument that the case was not unjudiciable, because he said the rule was part of the US federal code and it had legal consequences if you complied or you didn't comply with it. It had real impacts on people and businesses. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, so the 2020 rule is now in effect. It is in the regulatory language says accumulators may be allowed for brand name drugs with a generic alternative if it's permitted by state law. And the preamble of that rule says that copay assistance must count for brand name drugs without a generic. The judge did not stay the decision, so it had an immediate effect. Now the HHS has 60 days to request that stay or appeal it. I think our goal right now is to urge them, to not do that. And why would they want to increase patient cost sharing, at this time? And but they have that ability. And then, but it really would be good for HHS to issue clarifications and have an FAQ. A lot of plans are saying, well, we're not going to comply with this until that comes forward from CMS. And also they could do future rulemaking like the judge said that you can do, but that gives us an opportunity for all sides to weigh in. They may choose to do nothing and just let the 2020 rule stay in effect. The 2025, the logical thing would be in the 2025 notice of benefit payment parameters rule, but that's over at OMB right now. I think it would be kind of hard to change it and get it all ready and tied in a bow and go through all the legal hurdles to make sure it, they could justify it in court. So, I won't go into so much on the federal legislation and state laws and bills, but I've heard, do we still need the federal bill? Well, remember, there's going to be, so we may kill accumulators through this, but, we still have maximizers, and the federal legislation affects those as well. Also, in terms of the state laws and federal law, this could change. There could be another administration rule coming out. And so it's still important to have those statutes in law and at both the federal and state level. And just to end, this is the language that we, next slide, that we have to live with. Next slide. That copay assistance has to count for brand name drugs that do not have a generic. And then next slide, I say thank you all and get ready for your questions. If you want to read all of the briefs and our press releases, and this is the site on our website. If this is too long, you can just go to hivhep.org and go under our work, and there's a whole tab on the copay accumulator litigation. So thank you very much, and we'll be glad to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Carl. We have one question for you. Someone is asking, how much longer does HHS have to make their appeal?
Yeah, so they have 60 days from the decision. So that was, the decision was September 29th. So it looks like the end of November.
Great. And one more question was just submitted. Someone is asking how this ties in with the federal bill, the Help Co-Pays Act, and asked if you know anything about the current status of that legislation.
Yeah. So I see someone else wants to answer that too. So the impact, as I said, that, this is a ruling right now, and it could, they could come back with a different rule next year or 2 years from now or 3 years from now. But I think it's important to have federal legislation to codify this into law. And as I also said, it doesn't impact maximizers, this ruling. So it's important to have that second part of the bill codified, because it will say that drugs that are covered have to be essential health benefits. So you cannot take them off and have, the switch them over to the manufacturer copay assistance and milk the drug companies for all that money. And now I have heard, one of the problems with the bill is that it scores high, billions of dollars. It's going to cost the federal government billions of dollars. And so by having this lawsuit go in our favor, this is now the new standard of what current law, current regulation, current practice is. Copay assistance has to count. And therefore, those problems with the score go away. And so we've heard this from the Hill, from the authors of the bill. It would make it much easier to pass this law now.
Great. Thank you so much, Carl, for taking the time to join us today and answer all these questions, and for all the hard work you've been doing with this litigation. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. And the fight is not over. We won on this, but they're going to do more games, and to milk the copay assistance away from patients. So more to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Great. Ryan Shea with Bakery Drinker, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to you. Ryan is giving us all a quick update on what's going on the Hill right now.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Caitlin. Less of a victorious, positive note than Carl's what's going on here in Washington right now. As I'm sure many of you have seen the headlines, the House has been without an elected speaker for over 2 weeks now. This is historically an unprecedented situation where the lower branch of the US Congress is leaderless. The best analogy that I like to use is the House is currently in safe mode, like a computer. You can only do two things. It can vote to elect a speaker and motion to adjourn. And until the House has a speaker, it can't consider legislation. It can't forestall a government shutdown. It can't even vote on a resolution to express support for Israel and condemn the attack by Hamas. It can't vote on any efforts to fund the government, or even just the most basic resolution or renaming of a post office. And so until the House has a speaker, we are stuck in a type of limbo. And as many of you saw back on October 3rd, the threat of a motion to vacate became a reality, and Speaker Kevin McCarthy was ousted by 8 Republicans and all House Democrats that voted to boot him out of the Speaker's chair for literally the first time in US history. We had had a threaten of a motion to vacate the chair before, but it never had been successful in this case. And what that kicked off was a traditional leadership scramble that has been anything but traditional, and that the next up, the majority leader, Steve Scalise from Louisiana, was unable, despite winning a secret ballot in the House Republican Conference, to be able to get the requisite 217 to get a majority. He bowed out. And the next guy up is House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, who has now suffered 2 pretty colossal defeats on the House floor. It lost 20 Republicans the first time and 22 the second time. And the current speculation is that there will be a vote on a resolution to empower what's called the Speaker Pro Tem, a gentleman named Patrick McHenry, who then Speaker McCarthy put in basically as a caretaker to keep the lights on and handle these two votes, right, for Speaker and to adjourn. There's an effort to empower him through a House resolution to temporarily have the powers of a fully elected Speaker to consider some of the things that I mentioned, keeping the government online, and as well as a resolution to support Israel and potentially a supplemental. And why this is noticeable is because Jim Jordan, who's the Speaker designee, has said that he is not pushing for a third vote, but he is not withdrawing himself from that designation. And so the current plan is that he saddles McHenry, of course, assuming this succeeds, he saddles McHenry with needing to take care of the really hard stuff, funding the government, supplemental, all of these resolutions, while he continues an advocacy effort to retain the speakership in potentially sometime in January. Now, there are a lot of Republicans that just in the past hour have come out against this plan as saying that this isn't fair to voters. And so we're just going to have to see. Democrats, meanwhile, have been 100% unanimous behind Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, and there is some question to what they would be able to extract in form of concessions in order to support Speaker Pro Tem McHenry, because as of right now, he just doesn't have the votes just by Republicans in order to get those expanded powers. And so where this rubber meets the road for all of us here is that, Congress can't develop new programs. It can't fund the old ones once we hit the deadline in the middle of next month, and it's extremely hard to make any authorizing or appropriations changes. And so this singular issue facing the U.S. Congress, the federal government more broadly, is the House is just completely unworkable. It's not functional until it has a speaker. And so I anticipate that there will be updates that we will all get, because Jordan reversed course pretty quickly from not supporting the resolution to power McHenry to today saying that he will. It's possible that could change. And so it's as thick as mud, or as clear as mud, rather, to quote the analogy. And so we're obviously following this extremely closely because it has severe implications for a number of the programs that we all care about that will be, demonstrably affected by a government shutdown, let alone not being able to reach the FY24 appropriations levels that were agreed to by former Speaker McCarthy and President Biden. All of this has, downstream effects to a lot of the priorities that we care about. So that's in a nutshell. That's the chaos and the challenge that the House of Representatives finds it's in. So if there are any questions, I'd happy to try to provide an answer.
Thank you so much. That was such a concise update on all the craziness that's happening. So thank you for joining and giving us such a thorough update. I do not see any questions at the moment, but if those of you watching do have any questions for Ryan, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box. And Ryan, I'll let you know if any pop up.
Sounds great. Thank you, Caitlin.
Can I ask a quick question of Ryan? I would love for him to just explain a little bit about what it might mean if the government does shut down for some of the agencies we care most about, particularly the FDA or NIH. If you can just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is always a bit murky until it actually happens. The agencies were prepared at the end of the last fiscal year for a shutdown. That was the general expectation in Washington, and then Speaker McCarthy reversed course really quickly, and that ultimately cost him his job because the detractors voted against him, citing that. So what does the shutdown potentially mean for programs that we care about? Obviously, it means that a number of the key agencies that do oversight applications, grants, product reviews, they have to decide who is essential and non-essential workers. And it's extremely difficult for new product development reviews, for new programs to start up in the middle of a shutdown. Oftentimes, a number of those can continue with essential staff if they are already in progress. But again, if as a longer shutdown continues, that has further impacts for those existing product reviews and developments and approvals. And so it's really difficult to fully prognosticate the impact of it. It's largely dependent on the timing and the planning of the agencies themselves. They've had some time to prepare for this. And so I think it's some fair expectation to think that the agencies will be able to make the most of the situation, whereas in the past we've had shutdowns that have surprised some people, and you're not prepared for that. That impacts development and approvals. And so I think the things to really watch is what the agencies announce as to what they are going to prioritize, how many essential employees are they expecting, and by division and sub-agency, and then being able to leverage connections that we have with members of Congress and senators that really care about this, that they're able to get more concise or inside baseball answers for us on some of these specific programs that we really care about, that perhaps we won't be able to search in the public domain. And so that would just be some general thoughts there.
Great. Thank you for that, Ryan.
Sure.
And I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Jamie Sullivan. Jamie is joining us, of course, from the Every Life Foundation, and she is going to be speaking to you all about how the Inflation Reduction Act impacts the rare disease community. So, Jamie, I will go ahead and turn things over to you.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Caitlin. And thanks to Ryan and Carl for their time as well. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on where we're at with the IRA. I am guessing that this is not the first time many of you have heard about the IRA. So just we'll do a fairly minimal explanation of what is changing, but really focus in on what we're paying attention to and some congressional asks that are taking shape in terms of protecting the most vulnerable, rare research from potential unintended consequences of the IRA. So just to level set, the IRA makes changes over time. So while it was, passed over a year ago now, many of the changes that are included are in healthcare. So I guess that's the other headline. The IRA was not just healthcare, but we're going to focus today on the healthcare pieces that really rolls out starting this year with some minimal changes and really ramping up over the course of the next several years. And I love this graphic from the Kaiser Family Foundation because it kind of puts it all the most impactful health changes into a timeline. This year, there were some changes related to drug pricing, but really just requiring companies to pay rebates if those prices raised faster than inflation. For those who are insulin users, it did limit insulin copays to $35 a month. Importantly, all of these changes are, for the most part, are really related to Medicare beneficiaries, and that's because of the mechanism that was used to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. It had to have direct federal budget impacts because it was under a procedure called reconciliation, which allowed the bill to pass the Senate, pretty much on party line votes, or all on party line votes, rather than having to get 60 votes. So also this year it did reduce out-of-pocket costs for vaccines. So if you work on vaccine policy, or that you communicate about vaccines to your communities, this year it was the start of limiting out-of-pocket costs for vaccines, whether they are in Part D, Medicaid, or the Children's Health Insurance Plan. In 2024, next year, some really important changes: eliminates the 5% coinsurance for Part D catastrophic coverage. So it's getting us closer to that $2,000 out-of-pocket cap that will go into play in 2025. Basically, what this means in 2024 is that if your drug spend is so high that you get out of that phase where you do have some increased cost sharing. Previously, people would refer to it as the donut hole. It's not quite the same anymore. But in that phase above, I believe about $3,200 in spend, you're responsible for 5% of the drug's costs from here on out. There's no cap currently to Medicare Part D costs. And that's unlike a lot of other insurance programs where you do have an annual out-of-pocket cap. It's starting in 2025, though. That's the real significant change, that spend will be capped at $2,000. And that's really going to be beneficial for so many patients who are on high-cost therapies, and now we'll be able to then have a more predictable regular expense, in part because of the cap, in part because they also will be implementing a program that will allow you to spread out your costs for Medicare Part D related drugs throughout the year in a regular interval. And those details are being released and now, and how that program is going to work. So that's, of course, something that many in the patient advocacy community are following. There are some other changes in terms of eligibility levels for low-income subsidies, and making sure that these changes don't have outsized effects on Part D premium growth. But really where we're going to dive in a little bit more is in the implementation of the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Program. You can go to the next slide. So just again, a level set of, how are drug prices set now in Medicare? Part B drugs, those physician administered drugs, they're reimbursed based on a formula that's set, at the average sales price, which is basically, this is really simple ways of explaining it. There's a whole lot more detail that goes in, but the average price, that's all non-federal purchasers in the US, that 6% is added to help physicians cover the administration costs. Whereas Part D, those drugs you get at your pharmacy, when it was created, there was a non-interference clause that prevented the government from interfering in negotiations between drug plans or drug manufacturers and pharmacies and prescription plans. And that means that the prices are set similarly to commercial insurers, and it involves rebate negotiations, tiered formularies, and many of the issues that you've heard about on RDLA webinars in the past related to PBM reform and others come into play. But bottom line, the important thing to note is prior to the IRA, the government was not allowed to get involved in negotiations regarding Part D drugs. Go to the next. So the IRA changed that and created the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Program. And starting in 2026, there will be 10 Part D drugs. Those drugs have been announced now. You'll see them on a future slide that will be part of the drug price negotiation program. That number is going to grow. These are additive over time, and starting in 2 years later, it will also be open to Part B drugs. Now, we've covered a little bit more about who's eligible, how they're going to be decided in other webinars, and don't have the time to do that today, but all of these resources, are available to you either from EveryLife or from our partner organizations. So you can go to the next slide. So we are really in the midst of the negotiation process now, the first cycle. CMS announced earlier this fall the first 10 drugs that were going to be part of the negotiation process. There are a number of steps now that CMS will take with manufacturers in terms of requiring certain data submissions, issuing, a first price offer. The industry has, one chance to counter that offer and provide explanation, but ultimately then, the choice is to accept or pull, their products from the Medicare program. So all that to say, we, along with other patient advocacy communities, have encouraged CMS to really incorporate the role of patients and the patient voice in this process, so that the patient community can help inform the calculations that CMS is making, especially regarding clinical benefit, value, treatment alternatives, and other ways that they should be looking at what are the value of these therapies. None of the, well, actually, I'm sorry, 9 out of the 10 therapies are not primarily rare disease treatments. There is one treatment here that is approved for only rare indications, and that is a rare cancer treatment. And then, you see the other treatments are largely, for heart disease, for autoimmune conditions, diabetes, and more. So this list will, again, continue to grow every year. Thankfully, CMS was receptive to the asks around patient involvement. So they are hosting a series of patient listening sessions for each of these drugs. I put this up there in case you are interested in getting involved. Unfortunately, the registration was a very limited period, and that is closed, but you can view the sessions live in the link there to HHS's live streaming system. So if you're interested in seeing just how they go, what types of information is provided just to learn for the future, you can get on and view these the 10 different sessions. Next slide. So our focus here, how did the IRA treat orphan drugs, and how are we going to respond and protect orphan drugs from potential unintended consequences associated with the drug price negotiation program? The IRA did, as successive administrations have recognized that the rare disease ecosystem is more delicate, it's more unique, complex, and has unique challenges, often higher costs to develop drugs for rare diseases. And that's really, that's been recognized through the Orphan Drug Act and through successive years of policies that help provide additional incentives to encourage rare disease drug development. The IRA did include an orphan drug product exclusion from the negotiation. However, it is very narrow. And as a result, there are some major concerns about the unintended consequences it's having on investment in rare disease research, in particular on the investment in follow-on research or repurposing research, which seeks to discover new uses for an already approved drug. The exclusion applies only to products that are designated for one rare disease and have one approved indication, or multiple that are associated with the same designation. So basically, if a product is, all of its approvals are tied to one rare disease, it's just the approvals may be for different ages, within that disease, then it is exempt from the drug negotiation program. However, the second that product obtains a second designation, and we'll go into what that is, it is no longer exempt. And then when that product loses its exclusion, it will become negotiation eligible back 7 or 11 years from the very first approval that it received, even if that second designation is years later. And why are we concerned? Well, science is moving us towards more focus on platform approaches, on discovering new uses for existing treatments. And this is in fact, research the federal government is investing in, industry is, investing in it, and it drives investment in rare disease research. We know that we need more incentives for this type of work because it's more efficient, likely lower investment, and drugs have already been proven safe. So, it's really critical for the future of delivering options to the rare disease population that we only grow incentives, not lose incentives for this research to occur. Next slide. So just a quick drilling down a little bit more on the difference between designations and approved indications. They are not the same, yet the policy really treats them the same. And many in Congress we found are just unaware of what exactly a designation is compared to an approval. And so we have a big job to do to educate everyone about what a designation is and isn't. A designation is something that the FDA issues when a company is early in drug development, and it unlocks incentives that are tied to the Orphan Drug Act, such as the tax credits for qualified clinical trials, exclusion from FDA user fees if indeed an application was submitted, and some additional market exclusivity benefits if an approval is granted. So the requirements for a designation are really that proving the disease is indeed a rare disease, i.e. affecting fewer than 200,000 Americans, and that there's some preclinical or early clinical evidence that the drug candidate may plausibly work for that disease. After that designation is granted, or they continue to study the patients with that, the drug in the patients with that target disease. You'll often see a designation will read treatment of rare disease X. So this drug is designated for the treatment of, let's just say cystic fibrosis. That's, again, we'll just run with that example. And that is in a database run by an Office of Orphan Product Development in the FDA, and they've granted over 6,500 orphan designations since the Orphan Drug Act was passed. That, what it does not do, it is not an approval to market a drug in the US. And designation comes before an approval. At the end of the drug development program, if there's evidence that the drug is safe and effective, that's when the FDA approved indication will be issued. And that is the only point that allows for marketing of the drug in the US. And so we really want to make clear to Congress that the designation piece really has no role to play in determining whether a product is exempt or not, because it is simply to unlock R&D incentives and to make sure that companies are continuing to pursue additional research programs. You can go to the next slide. So this is super complicated image, but let me just take you through it. What scenario are we in now versus what are we hoping? And then we'll end with just a couple congressional asks that we are united and working towards with others in the patient advocacy community. So this is a small molecule drug with R&D programs in 2 different rare diseases. So they start with the first rare disease, we'll call it A. They've applied to FDA for a designation here in 2007, unlocks those R&D credits. They complete their research and development program, and in 2010, they apply and receive their first approved indication. And then from there, they are still exempt from the Medicare Drug Price Negotiation Program. The product is on the market. And then they, in the meantime, in 2009, have started a second clinical development program for rare disease B. And that program is showing some early signs of success. They go ahead and apply for the second designation in rare disease B to unlock those R&D incentives. Again, both tied to the Orphan Drug Act in 2012. In the current law, they would then, in 2012, lose the exemption from negotiation. And that would mean that they would become negotiation eligible 7 years after their first approval, which would be 2017. And in the proposed law, and what we are working towards, in order to protect the incentives for manufacturers to conduct this follow-on research in rare disease B, we are suggesting that they would lose their exemption in 2014 when that second approval was issued. And then they should be eligible for negotiation 7 years after the second approval. And what this does is it protects those in the time that of exclusivity that they need in order to be able to continue investing in this rare disease B clinical development program. And there's so many scenarios that you all are familiar with intimately of rare disease B that has no current treatment options, that plausibly scientists think that there's some underlying similarities with rare disease A that might mean that this drug that's already been proven safe and effective for rare disease A might indeed work for rare disease B. And what we don't want to see happen is for this research in rare disease B to be paused, canceled, delayed, because all of those patients in rare disease B also need that hope and that evidence that the drug is going to work for them. Some people might say, well, if it's on the market already, can't rare disease B patients just take it because it's on the market? And while technically that may be true, it's highly unlikely, that without the evidence that it works in your condition, that payers would pay, that prescribers, clinicians would feel comfortable prescribing. So I think that what we really need is a complete, research program. We need the evidence. We need the drugs full use, full potential to be explored. So while you can go to the next slide. I think you actually skip this one too. Skip one more. We know that this policy is having unintended effects already. This is just this, and you can go to the next one. These are just some of the decisions that have to be made currently in the pipeline. This was an article published last year where it just was making the point that there are so many drugs that have current early efforts to be studied for other disease areas, and manufacturers are facing a decision on whether to move forward, and many of these programs are not moving forward. Next slide. I think this is my last one. So what are we doing about it? Well, you heard the political reality, from Ryan just now. So we are very aware of what the current political reality is. We're also very aware that there's intense opposition to making any changes to the IRA, especially in the House. However, we do feel like there are two issues here that can be considered technical fixes to the current legislation that would help the problem and not solve completely. But we are very working with NORD and a group of patient advocacy organizations here in DC to really explore these changes and really impress upon Congress that these minor changes can make a big difference. And will we need policy change in terms of changing the orphan exclusion overall so that it applies to more than just one approval? That may be the case, and there are some current legislative efforts to do that. However, given the current political reality, and given what we know might be possible now, we are really focused on leading a patient-driven effort to achieve these two changes, which we think will have a big impact in the meantime. It's really, again, clarifying that designations really have no tie to the eligibility for the orphan drug exclusion, should really only be based on an approval. And then also clarifying that the eligibility for negotiation should be 7 or 11 years after that second approval rather than the first approval. We think these changes will certainly help in investor, and manufacturer decisions, and keep ensuring that those incentives to study a drug's potential will be there. We will explore with NORD and others what the overall policy change needs to be in the future, and certainly if political realities change, work towards overall change down the line. So stay tuned. This is really in the early efforts. This is going to be a campaign that we work very, inside baseball, trying to convince enough people in the staff that run committees that these are small changes and needed in order to prevent what we're already seeing as real impacts of the narrowness of the exclusion. So stay tuned, and you'll hear more from us, more ways to get involved moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. We do have a couple questions for you in the Q&A. The first is, what sets the negotiation time frame, the 7 to 11 years? How was that determined?
So currently in the current law, you're either eligible to be selected for negotiation, so meaning the process starts 7 or 11 years after the product is on the market. And the difference is whether it's a small molecule drug at 7 years or a large molecule drug at 11 years. That large molecules, you most traditionally would think of them as biologics, cell and gene therapies, and otherwise. There are some other exemptions in the IRA that we didn't talk about. Those things like plasma-derived products, products that are under a certain revenue threshold, some time-limited small biotech exemptions. But by and large, you're eligible 7 or 11 years, depending if you're a small molecule or a large molecule drug.
Perfect. And so far, have any congressional offices been interested in either of these two asks?
Yeah, right now we've been working primarily on discussions with committee staff, educating on what the difference is between indications and approvals is probably taking up a large part of meetings, just getting to the basics. There are certainly some there are some that are supportive and understanding and willing to talk further. And then there is a general attitude in the Democratic Party and leadership that the IRA is not to be touched. And so we're navigating that. We're going to need certainly community voices that help express the real current unintended harm of the policy and why these fixes may make a difference, in the near term. So at the same time, you won't see a large public campaign yet. And our hope is that because they are technical fixes and this will not be standalone legislation, we can really make some progress just with those conversations with committee offices.
Great. And one last question for you. Someone asked, what is the reasoning of losing exemption after a second designation? And they asked, does that discourage pharmaceutical companies to use and pursue their research for multiple purposes?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're concerned about. Even if Congressional Ask 1 is successful, there are still concerns that by losing the exemption after the second approval and being eligible for negotiation based on the first approval timeline, that research won't happen. And so we know that this is not the panacea of all solutions, but ultimately, if these small, more feasible fixes were to be successful, we think it will at least encourage that research to continue and for many allow for at least a second use of the product to be discovered. But there are definitely conversations that will be had about what is the policy change needed to preserve the incentives to research the second, third, fourth indications of a drug and really make sure its full potential is realized.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. I know this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in right now, so I appreciate you coming and covering this for us and answering everyone's questions.
Thank you.
Of course. I'm going to quickly turn things over to our state advocacy manager, Kinley, to give you guys an update on an upcoming state advocacy webinar.
Really quickly, I just wanted to make you aware of our upcoming RDLA state advocacy webinar. It will be happening on Wednesday, October 25th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be discussing patient involvement in drug utilization boards. It should be a really informative webinar, and we hope that you're able to join us. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Kinley. And you guys can register for that on the RDLA website. We also encourage you to attend the next RDLA webinar. The November webinar is going to be held on Thursday, November 16th at noon. And then, of course, we encourage you to keep in touch with us, sign up for our newsletters, action alerts, and keep up with our events. You can do all of that at rareadvocates.org. And of course, our social media handles are here if you would like to follow along on social media. It's a great way to stay up to date with all the different things going on. As you guys know, there's always a handful of different events taking place at one time. So it's a great way to stay up to date with everything happening. And then last but not least, I would like to give a thank you to our October RDLA webinar sponsors, and a thank you to all of you for attending today, or everyone who's watching this recording back. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. We will see you in November.